Some of those will now be removed and transported to Whitney, where they will be placed on the grave.
We talked earlier, Dwayne, about the nature of a Mormon funeral and what we would expect. And I think you outlined in broad form exactly what did take place. It was not only a tribute to a person who had died, but it was very much a religious and a doctrinal service, a reaffirmation of Mormon tenets, Mormon beliefs, which of course were characteristic of Ezra Taft Benson.
The thing I found interesting, though, was that each of the four speakers took opportunity to reflect on personal experiences that they had had with President Benson over the years. The four men who spoke have labored with him for many, many years. They've known each other intimately. And based upon that, each was able to reflect on personal experience. Some of them became quite emotional at times. We see Bruce, the apostles there, of course, one of our senators, Orrin Hatch, and other dignitaries.
Carol Fay, Regional Director of the IRS, political candidates.
Two representatives, yes, Father J. Terrence Fitzgerald, who is the administrator of the Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake City right now.
Senator Bennett. These, I think, are presidents of the Women's Organization, the Relief Society.
Yes. We just saw the Catholic leaders a moment ago. We have been told that momentarily up on South Temple at the Cathedral of the Madeleine, the bells of the cathedral will toll in honor of President Benson.
No reports were possible from the inside of the tabernacle during this service, but our Ed Yates was inside to get the feel of how that service took place. It's always a bit different being there from what it is watching it or listening to it on the radio. Ed, if you're able to hear me, I believe you're with Jane Clayson, perhaps should characterize the experience from inside.
Interesting, Jane, some observations here from inside the tabernacle. There was a constant glancing at Elder Howard W. Hunter by members of the Quorum of the 12, and when he stood to speak, Elder Boyd K. Packer and a security guard were immediately behind him, sitting down low in chairs, just keeping an eye on him, making sure that everything was okay. The tabernacle was far from full, but then there were a lot of people outside here where the weather is nice, preferred to stay out here and listen to the proceedings. We also are living in a different time. Mass communications now keeps people at home watching these proceedings. And so the full tabernacle for a funeral proceeding may be a thing of the past and has nothing to do with tribute to President Benson, but just simply the style of the way they prefer to listen to the proceedings. Did notice when the hymn was sung, How Great Thou Art, one of President Benson's favorite hymns, there were some tears in the eyes of members of the Tabernacle Choir, tears of sincerity, because they were singing this with all their heart as sort of a final tribute to their leader. Many young people in the balcony, especially on the north side of the tabernacle, again dressed in white with white shirts and ties. Interesting also that these proceedings are still very solemn. If we look historically back at the church, for example, at President Taylor's funeral, very, very somber, very sobering, but there is still the solemnness of the ceremony, but without diminishing the charm and lightness of the soul of their leader. And this was obvious with President Benson, some humorous remarks by Elder Boyd K. Packer, even by Elder Hunter, and you sort of hear a chuckle in the congregation. This is something you would not have seen perhaps back in President Taylor's time at his during his funeral, but it is something now that has become part of the contemporary presidents. We did notice the seating of Senators Bennett and Hatch and Governor Leavitt. We could not see the rest of the congressional delegation or dignitaries, but I was sort of isolated on the balcony in the press section, and I had to sort of bend over the balcony to see where they were seated, and they may have been, others may have been further south under the balcony. Again, solemn, but without diminishing the charm of the personality of President Benson. We did see some tears in some of the eyes of those out in the in the audience, and others would divert their attention upwards, sometimes out a window, looking like they were meditating over the words that were being said by the leaders here today. So, Jane, some of my observations while sitting in the tabernacle.
It was, from out here, a solemn and sorrowful feeling among the members who were gathered around the tabernacle, but you get the feeling also that it was a celebration of President Benson's life.
I believe it was indeed that, Jane, and some of the remarks talked about the highlights of his life.
Elder Boyd K. Packer was one of those speakers. He reminded us that during the years President Benson served in government, he mingled with the great men of the world. He named a few: Chiang Kai-shek, Khrushchev, Ben-Gurion, the Shah of Iran, Tito, Eisenhower, names that will be remembered throughout history.
You see now that the procession has started. The hearse is pulling out of Temple Square, turning out the south gate as they will exit onto South Temple to form it'll be an informal cortege up to Whitney, Idaho. They are not going to have a formal escort all the way up, we're told, but they expect to take about 2 hours before they arrive in Whitney, at which time we will again be giving you live coverage of the graveside services that will take place there.
We will, however, follow this until it leaves the boundaries of Salt Lake City, Bruce, following the cortege down South Temple to 3rd West. It will pass right in front of the Triad Center, our facilities here at Broadcast House, and on to the 6th North on-ramp of I-15.
Those who spoke, Duane, were, I believe, among the senior leaders of the church now.
They would be considered the 4 senior apostles in order of seniority: President Howard W. Hunter, President Gordon B. Hinckley, President Thomas S. Monson, and Elder Boyd K. Packer.
Here you see the procession exiting the south gate of Temple Square, turning west on South Temple.
What a beautiful day. We couldn't have asked for more appropriate weather. It is a beautiful picture there from across the street at the Crossroads Mall on the roof.
There you see the crowds who are lined, as Jane and Ed told us earlier, a number of people, tourists who would expect to be in Salt Lake on a summer Saturday, wandered onto Temple Square wondering what all of the activity was about.
Would be an interesting experience, would it not?
Wouldn't that be? Wouldn't that be? What I did on my vacation.
Yes, indeed.
Here's the hearse now, having been preceded by other members of the funeral party.
That's a tight fit, but the gate's obviously able to handle the vehicle.
See people standing on the side of the street almost at attention. The street appears to have been cleared by Salt Lake City Police to give it a straight exit out of the city.
The race must be over.
Salt Lake Classic, which typically has been held on Memorial Day, but moved this year for the first time. We'll attempt to follow with our cameras the procession as it leaves the city. The news specialist Keith McCord has a camera with a view from atop the Triad Center here. Keith, tell us what route the funeral cortege will take.
Bruce and Duane, what they'll do is the cortege coming out of the south gate of Temple Square, and they will go westbound on South Temple to 300 West here where we are, and then they will make a right turn and head northbound on 300 West and go to 600 North. And then they'll make a left turn on 6th North to get onto Interstate 15. And from there, then the procession heads north on I-15 to the Brigham City exit, goes through Sardine Canyon, and on Highway 91 through Logan, and then on up to Whitney, and Whitney's 7-8 miles just north of the border. Just below us here on the corner of South Temple and 300 West, we can see the cortege coming, escorted by a Salt Lake City motorcycle policeman going just below us here, and you might hear the sirens. What the Salt Lake City Police Department has done is provided about 12 officers, and those motorcycle officers are going ahead of the cortege and blocking off the intersections on 300 West here, so the procession can just go uninterrupted through the intersections. The Salt Lake County Sheriff's Department has provided 2 motorcycle officers, and those officers will lead the cortege all the way up to the Davis County line on I-15, And from there, it's pretty much an informal procession, as you mentioned just a minute ago, Bruce, on up to Logan. The Utah Highway Patrol did offer a full escort all the way to Logan. The church declined and just wanted it to be more of an informal drive up to southern Idaho. However, the UHP has been notified. The troopers all the way up the line are aware that the procession is underway, and they will just keep an eye on things on the way and just kind of monitor it. And if there are any problems, they can be there if anything happens. As
Keith,
you can
we're
see,
looking, yes, from your camera there at the vantage point. We see that it's moving up 3rd West now, I guess, to North Temple here.
It's just right on North Temple right now. The motorcycle officers are blocking traffic, and the line of cars going all the way up the street here. And there's a pretty good line of cars behind the cortege as well.
I'm wondering, Keith, if the line of cars would include some of the additional family members that were not parked on the square. Does it look like they've had time to catch up with the cortege yet?
I think so. It depends on how fast they can get to their cars. I'm seeing just some other normal traffic resuming behind them now. Once they get onto the interstate, depending on how fast they go, I assume the other family members can probably catch them. The route's pretty simple, so once they get on the interstate, they'll be, I'm sure they'll be able to get to them fairly quickly.
As we've said a couple of times in the broadcast, perhaps it's worth reminding once again, this is only the second time that a leader of the LDS Church is buried outside of the state of Utah. Joseph Smith, the church's founder, of course, being the only other one. He being buried along the banks of the Mississippi River in Nauvoo, Illinois.
As you mentioned, Dwayne, a little bit ago, the procession, the drive to Whitney, roughly around 2 hours or so. And it could take a little bit longer than that by the time they get there, I guess, for everybody to park and all the other guests and family members to get there. It may take a little longer than 2 hours from now before the burial proceedings begin.
Keith, we have a view from Chopper 5 now. It appears that the hearse is going through, I believe, about 5th North on 3rd West, and will soon make its left turn onto the I-15 on-ramp there. It will take, what, a couple of hours, an hour, 2.5 hours perhaps, to get to Whitney?
Yeah, I've checked with the law enforcement agencies on up the line, and none of them are doing anything special per se, but I think they're all on alert that the procession is coming through, so it'll go through Brigham City and Logan uninterrupted and make it through the intersections and that kind of thing. But there, of course, has been construction throughout Sardine Canyon for the last few months, but that's been stopped today, so the procession can go through there. So, yeah, it should pretty much an uninterrupted drive to Whitney, so figure about 2 hours from now, and then we'll be back on the air again for that.
It appears that the traffic that's going by now is no longer part of the procession. I see over your left shoulder.
The procession did not go too much behind the hearse. There was a few more cars, and then after that, regular traffic was allowed to get in behind it. But I think most people downtown here, I think, are aware of what's going on with all the motorcycle police, the sirens and lights. They were aware of what was happening.
All right, thank you very much, Keith McCord, from our vantage point here atop the Triad Center. This funeral was about an hour and 35 minutes long, and it was full of tributes. Why don't you share some of the other highlights that you heard?
Well, I think one of the interesting highlights was that of President Thomas S. Monson, his counselor. He digressed and spoke rather personally about the experiences that he's had with him. He called him the plowboy prophet. I think an indication of his roots in the Idaho farmland. Of course, President Benson was born in Whitney, Idaho. That's where he is returning.
When the party arrives there, our live coverage will resume from the cemetery. But right now, Ruth Todd is there. Ruth, when are the graveside services expected to take place?
Well, Bruce, it took our crew about 2 hours to drive from Salt Lake City up here to the Whitney, Idaho cemetery. And so the funeral procession is taking the same route we did. We're expecting them sometime between 2 and 2:30 or thereabout. All seems ready here at the cemetery. This is a very small cemetery. We estimate about 75 yards square. Beautiful, stately cottonwoods and spruce form the perimeter. It is a very serene and, at this moment, quiet setting. But officials say 70 cars will probably be in that procession once they all get through. Those 70 cars will be allowed to come up the lane to the cemetery and park around the little road around the perimeter of the cemetery. Everybody else, though, will have to park down and walk 200 or 300 yards up to the cemetery, or if they can't make that walk, they can take a shuttle service from the church, which is in Whitney, just a couple of minutes away. They say nobody will be turned away, and we're told that several buses from Idaho are coming down so that people from Idaho, too, can be part of the graveside service.
All right, Ruth, thank you very much. How far away from President Benson's birthplace and home is that little cemetery?
Not very far at all. Whitney is very small. It's just down the road, a couple of miles at the most. And so in just a few hours, he will be buried near his birthplace, right next to his wife, and about 50 yards from his parents, brother, and other family members.
All right, thank you very much, Ruth Todd. And we'll be returning to Whitney to resume coverage in about 2 hours as the funeral party arrives in Whitney. Prophet, statesman, and farm boy Ezra Taft Benson going home to Whitney. And when that entourage arrives, we will break in again with more coverage. We invite you now to stay tuned for a special half-hour documentary entitled Ezra Taft Benson, Patriot and Prophet. Special programming in honor of President Benson will continue throughout the afternoon here on Channel 5. 2 documentaries on the travels of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, A Land Called Israel, and Songs of Freedom. And then we'll return with that live coverage of the graveside services at Whitney, Idaho. For Dwayne Cardall and all the news specialists, I'm Bruce Lindsay, thanking you for joining us and wishing you a good afternoon.
A long-established pattern for succession in the LDS Church left little doubt. Because of his seniority among the church's apostles, Ezra Taft Benson was in line to succeed Spencer W. Kimball as president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. President Kimball died November 5th, 1985, and in that moment, Ezra Taft Benson became the prophet leader for your money, always.
Welcome back to KSL's live coverage of today's final tributes to Ezra Taft Benson, 13th president of the LDS Church. We interrupt that documentary on Songs of Freedom about the Mormon Tabernacle Choir in Eastern Europe, where President Benson had such a great influence. It's been 2 hours since the funeral party left Temple Square in Salt Lake City, and you're looking now at live pictures from the cemetery in Whitney, Idaho. Our understanding is that procession has arrived in Whitney. They've stopped briefly at the church before arriving at the cemetery. And we have our Ruth Todd, who is there in the small Whitney Cemetery, to tell us about what's taking place right now. And joining her is news specialist Steve Eager. Ruth?
Bruce, thank you very much. Now, just to give you a little bit of perspective, you said that the processional had stopped at the Whitney Church. That is just very close, probably less than a mile from here.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And they stopped for a quick break. Then they should be coming up here any minute. And, of course, we'll go to that as soon as it happens. We came here early this morning. When we arrived early this morning, we were the only people here except for a couple of security officers. That's all changed. There is a quiet buzz now in the Whitney Cemetery where several hundred,
already, I would say 200 to 300, and as we mentioned, the procession isn't even here yet. We talked with the Franklin County Sheriff this morning, asked him, what do you expect? He really didn't have any idea because they are opening this cemetery to anyone. Mm-hmm. They have, of course, closed it to vehicles, but anyone can walk in, and they are welcoming everyone out here. So they don't really know. They expect quite a few people.
That's right. There are plenty of well-wishers already paying their last respects, ready to pay their last respects to a very beloved native son of Whitney, Idaho.
We talked with a lot of people. We went to lunch in Preston, and this is what's on everyone's minds. They were asking us, can we get out there? Will we have the opportunity? They weren't sure if they'd be allowed in. We told them, come out and take a look. As I think you mentioned earlier in this broadcast and the coverage this morning, the yellow ribbons lining the roads. We talked to some of the people that were doing that, and they said the reason for that is because he's not only the president of the Worldwide Church, they felt he's our president, our right. Franklin County Whitney president.
If you didn't see him earlier, these are the yellow ribbons. I was given one by one of the Relief Society sisters. The youth of the Whitney Ward, the Relief Society sisters, and some other people all got together and made these yellow ribbons. They're all over Whitney. They line the road, the little lane that comes up to the cemetery. They're out on Highway 91, and she told me we wanted to give President Benson the right kind of welcome home. They love him here, and as they do around the world, and it's so apparent.
They really do. They expected some people to line the streets as well. Maybe as that procession moved through Logan and Franklin, which is just about 3 miles away, they expected a lot of people to be out there. I asked someone, and the sheriff and a lot of the caretakers, they say this is an exciting day because their Ezra Taft Benson is coming home, and they're glad to see that.
Ruth, Steve, this is Bruce in Salt Lake. We're looking there just a moment ago at a picture of the grave. It's a small town, as you've been telling us. People know each other. Ruth, tell us the story of who dug that grave.
This is a great story. There is an 80-year-old man named Marcus Weaver. He is a fifth-generation Whitney resident, and he is the third-generation sexton of this very cemetery. He said, what, there are 450 graves here?
He dug about 300 is what he told us.
Right, he has dug 300, and he was a Boy Scout, and guess who was his Boy Scout leader?
Ezra Taft Benson.
Ezra Taft Benson was his scout leader, took him on a now, I guess, famous trip to Bear Lake, and he was friends and remained friends with his scouts, and he would come to Whitney, Idaho, he would pat Marcus Weaver on the back and say, now, Marcus, you take care of yourself, because someday I want you to dig my grave. I want you to bury me. And so this week, that request
He took
came
a
to
lot
fruition.
of pride. You were there when we were talking about that. The corners were just exact. He said his wife wanted it to look just right. And, you know, there's a lot of pride out here in this community.
There really is. And it was so interesting. He's 80 years old. Until he was 77 or 78, he dug all of those 300 graves, he said, by hand. Now, he's since...
Got a backhoe a couple of years ago.
Right, he got a backhoe. But he even gets down in the graves now and takes a shovel and squares off the corners. And didn't he tell us that he wanted to make President Benson's just
right.
a little
Just
straighter
perfect.
and a little more perfect than the average? But what a delightful man, and his wife and his children. We spoke with them a little while ago.
We can see the flowers arriving here from some of the vans, Steve and Ruth. Tell me what the people in Franklin County have been doing during this morning and early afternoon. Did they watch the funeral on television in their homes, or was there a place in the church they watched it together?
Bruce, I stopped by there on the way up the Franklin Stake Center in Franklin, and there was a small number of people. A local radio station was actually broadcasting live from the Franklin Stake Center, a Preston station, and it was a small number, though, because for the most part they were watching on TV also. I'm not sure if you talked about this earlier, but this whole community is preparing for the post-funeral luncheon, and I saw people cooking potatoes in ovens, and they were watching the funeral services on television and scrambling to get this luncheon together. Again, this pride thing. I talked to a lady making the potatoes. She says, put a little extra sour cream and a little extra cheese because this is a very special day. That's the kind of thoughts that are up here today, Bruce.
And I think another lady told me that she doesn't know of anybody's kitchen that isn't being used today because it's a family meal, you know, post-graveside service. But this is a large family. We're expecting a couple hundred people from the Benson family, Bruce.
All right, thank you very much, Steve and Ruth. We'll be rejoining you in just a moment. Right now we have a guest with us here in the studio, Ezra Taft Benson biographer Sherry Dew, who joined us earlier this morning and is kind enough to come back and talk to us now that the funeral cortege has arrived in Franklin. We heard in the funeral several times that Ezra Taft Benson was the plowboy who became a prophet and a statesman, and he said, I want to be buried in Franklin. Explain to us this attachment of this man who saw the world to this little town in Idaho.
It's home. It's where he began. And I think above and beyond that, there's something about being a farm boy. I'm a farm girl. I know something of this. You just become attached to that place where you began. And he loved Whitney. He thought he would always be a farmer. In fact, when he met Flora, this young socialite girl from a kind of wealthy family in Logan, and fell in love with her and then asked her to marry him, he made her promise that she'd be willing to come back and live on the farm in Whitney the rest of their lives because that's where he thought he would live out life.
Probably what's more remarkable than his farm background is that he really left the farm. He pursued an education as a agricultural economist. What in Whitney gave him a model to do that?
That's an interesting question, and I have always been curious because in that era, you talk about the 1920s and 30s, you're not used to going for a bachelor's degree at BYU. Then he got his master's degree at Iowa State and in Ames, and he even pursued PhD work. He had a real interest in finding out more about agricultural economics, ways to improve varieties of seed, increase yield, and so there was just something inside of him that made him want to be better than what he had seen. But his dad was also known as being one of the finest farmers in Franklin County.
Once he left the Preston-Whitney area, how often did he return? Did he maintain a home there, or was he able to return on a frequent basis, Sherry? What happened there?
They, you know, as he traveled the world, and I mean he did, everywhere, they would make tracks back and forth through Boise, where he lived for a time, through Whitney, as often as he could, and make almost a small pilgrimage up to Cache Valley, that beautiful valley, up to Logan. Those were very tender places. He and Flora would often, if they wanted to get away for just a day or two, sneak up to Logan.
I recall a few years ago they had a day honoring President Benson in the Preston area, and he was the Grand Marshal of the parade up in that area. Did that happen very often? Whenever he came to town, was he sort of the center of attention?
You can imagine a small town like that they have a man who goes on to become a Secretary of Agriculture and President of the church. He was like, you know, local boy does good, and that was how they felt whenever he returned. The people there seemed to just cherish their association with him, and I think all the Bensons. Absolutely.
With his worldwide travels, they didn't begin until he was 20 years old and went off on a Mormon mission to England. And I suppose that he didn't travel far from the Cache Valley during those earlier years. What was it about that upbringing that would be evidenced in his character and his personality in the later years? What were the values that he picked up?
I think he learned to work hard. That's just normal on any farm, but gee, by the time he was 5, he could drive a team. When he was 7, he was thinning beets. His dad goes off for a mission when he's just 12 years old, and he's left to take care of a dairy herd and try to take care of the family.
Those are literal stories. That's just not that's just not a legend.
Those are the facts. Those are absolutely the facts. In addition to that, he learned to be a leader. I think, you know, on a farm you grow up with a certain freedom. You learn to do things faster, and he just learned how to take charge, and I think that leadership skill, we heard it referred to in the funeral today many times about his wonderful administrative skill. He learned how to organize something, get it done efficiently back on the farm, and I think we saw evidence of that throughout his entire life. That started in Whitney, I think.
How many years did he actually farm? I mean, we talk about him being a farmer, the plowboy prophet. Did he actually spend much time with his hands in the soil?
Well, growing up all those years he did. Once he came back from his mission, went to BYU, and then went and got his master's degree in Iowa, he and Flora then came back and farmed for just, I'm going to say 2 or 3 years at the most, where they were actually farming, and then he became a county extension agent, and it started to roll from there, where he had administrative agricultural posts.
But throughout, even all the way to becoming Secretary of Agriculture, he took great pride in saying that he was a farmer whose hands had been in the soil, and that served him well, really, as he worked with that constituents.
Absolutely. In fact, as secretary, he would often get up early when he was out traveling. He'd get up early and go knock on as a matter of fact, it was legendary that he'd go knock on some farmer's door at 6 a.m. and say, "Can I help you milk the cows?" And that broke down a lot of barriers with some of the folks that may have been a little suspicious of some of his policies.
It's my understanding as well, Sherry, that he always kept a family garden, so in that sense he was able to maintain that relationship with the soil.
His sons will say that their dad was the first middleman they ever worked for. He started this garden, and then of course as the boys got older and the girls, they would help out in the garden, and then the boys would go sell the produce, and were obligated to pay their dad some fee for having provided the seed and the water and the plot and everything, and that was a Benson family institution.
So when he kept using this label farm boy for himself, was this self-deprecation or was this badge of honor, or how did he relate to that?
He's thrilled with that. He is thrilled to be thought of as a farmer. In fact, he loves farmers. Many people have asked me, why were you chosen to write the biography of President Benson, which remains to this day a mystery, but if there's one qualification I had, I am a legitimate Kansas farm girl, and every time we would talk, the first thing he'd ask is, "How's your dad? What's happening with harvest?" He just was, he loved the soil. He loved that whole industry.
Today, I think it was interesting during the funeral, I believe it was President Hinckley who made reference to the fact that he was literally and truly an overclad, sunburned boy who at a very early age came to know the law of the harvest. Basically what you're telling us here, that experience as a youth on the farm, he learned the elements of hard work, but also the law of the harvest.
Yeah, he learned that you reap what you sow, and back in that era, you're talking about now the dawning of the 20th century, they were dependent upon what they were able to raise and grow for food. And so whether or not the crops did well was a matter of, does the family eat? Do we have clothing? Can we provide? And his father, we mentioned this earlier today, was one of his great role models, was known as a man of great integrity and industry. I think his father really taught him that entire principle that what we do, we'll reap the benefits of it down the road.
Thank you very much, Sherry Dew, for offering
thank
your
you.
perspective to us today. Let's go now back to Whitney, President Benson's hometown, where we see that the funeral party is now arriving. Ruth Todd and Steve Eager are there. Ruth, tell us what's happening, please.
All right, well, we knew that they had taken a short break just about a half a mile down the road at the local church They are all starting to get into the graveside. You can kind of see the little lane. There's a lot of dust being kicked up. That's because it's just a dirt road. They did take a water truck earlier today to try to minimize the dust, but nevertheless, dust with the sun is being kicked up again. The cars are coming. There's a line of cars. What do you see, Steve?
Mixed in with those cars, I know, is the shuttle service. We mentioned how many of the public want to attend this this service, and the cars just simply won't fit out here, and so they're shuttling folks from the church to the graveside. I'm still looking, and I don't really actually see the hearse or the
We have another
procession.
camera
Bruce,
that
do you
we're
see it?
able to see. We haven't seen the hearse, Steve. We have been able to see a series of vans that were driving up, and maybe that's the shuttles that you're referring to. So all the people I see behind you, are they people from the community from Whitney, or are they people who have come up from Salt Lake?
For the most part, I believe they're local community members, although there are some people who just arrived from Salt Lake. And I can tell you, Bruce, we talked about people along the route paying their respects, and I just found out from someone who just arrived from Salt Lake that there were literally thousands of people along that route from Kaysville all the way north. We didn't know how many might be there, but we are told thousands of people to watch this procession go by.
They said they expected something. They had no idea that they would get that kind of overwhelming turnout. Now, in the cars that are just pulling up behind me, I've noticed some of the brethren. I saw Elder Dallin Oaks, Elder Maxwell, and his wife, Colleen, are here in this red car
Driving
behind
their
us.
own cars, yes.
And so the brethren are here, and they're getting out, and they will proceed over near the awnings. It is pretty warm out here today. They've got a couple of tents set up under which the brethren will stand. They have a few chairs, just a few, for some people who may be fatigued by the long day as well as the warm sunshine.
We're looking, Ruth, at some of the members of the Council of the 12 now getting out of their cars. Explain to us what happens here in the next few minutes.
Well, as soon as everybody gets in, then, of course, they will go over near the grave, which has been dug. The graveside service itself is relatively short. Howard W. Hunter did make the trip up here. He will be presiding. Gordon B. Hinckley will be conducting the service. And then, as is tradition and is an ordinance in the Mormon Church, a priesthood ordinance, a dedicatory prayer will be given upon the grave. It will be pronounced upon President Benson's grave. And that will be done by President Benson's eldest son, Reed Benson.
And the whole thing, it's a relatively short process for people unfamiliar. Once it gets started, it might only take 5 to 10 minutes.
Will they remain there for some time, or is this party turning around and coming back to Salt Lake?
Bruce, we found some things out about that. The family, as we mentioned earlier, will have a special Benson luncheon at the Whitney Church here, but the Council of the 12, the general authorities, we are told will turn right back around after the service and go back to Salt Lake. We also learned just a couple of minutes ago, the last funeral for Flora Benson, some folks stopped off on the way to eat. This one, the general authorities, the 12, had boxed lunches, we're told, on the ride up. Kind of a new twist.
There is President Howard W. Hunter now exiting his car. It appears prepared to head over to the area where the ceremony will be held, Bruce.
Of course, when everyone is in place, then the pallbearers, these grandsons of President Benson, will move the casket over the grave, and that brief ceremony will begin. Extensive preparations, I know, have been made to accommodate the worldwide interest in this event, with the satellite trucks that are there parked beyond a hedge and a row of trees. There have been security arrangements and media arrangements underway for the last 4 days to make this make it possible. We're looking at, some of these pictures are on a pool camera that we're sharing with other broadcast outlets.
There you see two of President Hunter's assistants, not Steve and Ruth, but the shot just prior to that, two of his assistants who are helping him make his way to the gravesite.
There's just been a little lull. We've seen some of the brethren and their wives get out there graciously shaking hands with some of the well-wishers who are here, some of the local residents, and then we're waiting for the hearse yet. So it has not arrived, but we'll be here shortly, we are told.
All right, thank you very much. We'll be getting back to you. As long as there is a bit of a lull, Dwayne, why don't you talk to us about where other church presidents are buried? Now, we've heard earlier in the day that this is only the second time that a Mormon church leader has been buried outside the state of Utah.
It is, and most of them have actually been buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. But when he becomes he will actually become one of 3 former presidents buried away from Salt Lake City, and as you said, Bruce, only one of 2 outside of the state of Utah. Here's a look at where the other presidents are buried.
Workers in the office of the Salt Lake City Cemetery get the inquiry all the time.
In our drawer here we have the list of all the prophets, and on the back shows a picture and a small summary of them.
Using the cemetery map, you can easily find the graves of the 9 church presidents buried here in the city cemetery. The last one, of course, was Spencer W. Kimball on that stormy day in 1985. Of course, the church's founder isn't buried in Utah. Joseph Smith's grave is near the Mississippi River in Nauvoo, Illinois, behind a home where he lived. Brigham Young led the Mormons west. He left specific instructions he be laid to rest at a spot that originally was part of his farm. Today, the private Brigham Young Cemetery is on First Avenue, about a block east of the church office building. Lorenzo Snow isn't buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery either. You'll find the grave of the church's 5th president in Brigham City, a town he helped found. But the rest of them are here. John Taylor, the 3rd president. The granite for this monument came from Little Cottonwood Canyon. And here's President number 4. Wilford Woodruff's marker is considered one of the most unusual, described as a garden headstone 7 feet across, 8 feet high, and very intricate. Joseph F. Smith's tombstone is called a ledger because of its flat style and biographical information on the 6th president. Like several others, the monument for the 7th president reaches heavenward. Heber J. Grant died in 1945. George Albert Smith's tombstone is also a ledger, providing details about the life of the church's 8th president. The grave marker of the 9th president, David O. McKay, is simple in design, but large like the stature of the man buried here. It's 8 feet wide, over 12 feet high. His successor, President Joseph Fielding Smith. He was the church's 10th president. On Harold B. Lee's tombstone are 2 roses. They are said to represent love and beauty and perfection and compassion, attributes of the church's 11th president.
Do you have much interest in this? Did many people come by?
Oh, yes, a lot of people. There's groups of children that come with their leaders, from the church. Mm-hmm. The primary and that, they come in. And then schools, a lot of schools come in with their groups and ask for copies of these, and they give them out, and then they each all go walking around the cemetery.
Always a fascinating thing to look for. And I think we should note as well, Bruce, that many of the president's graves are surrounded by other family members. You look around and you'll see common names.
So they're scattered about that Salt Lake City Cemetery. It's not as if there's a section for one.
No, they're scattered all over.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Duane. Let's bring in Sherry Dew once again to talk to us about this place called Whitney, because it's near a lot of other places that show up in Mormon history, Idaho towns of Oneida and Rexburg, and not so far away. He had some early associations with other figures who rose to church prominence.
He did. He went to high school in Preston at the Oneida Academy is what they call it, which was really a church-owned or church-operated high school. And there he went to school with Harold B. Lee. I can't remember, Elder Lee was either a year older or a year younger. He played basketball on the team. Matter of fact, that was one of his favorite events. He was quite a healthy, robust, strong young man, tall, and kind of their star forward. And in some of their travels there, he first met Marion G. Romney, who played for the Ricks team. And so in those early days, they had some interesting crossing of paths of early church leaders.
Now, he attended what was the old agricultural college in Logan in his early years, but he received his degree from BYU, is that right?
He went to school in Logan before he went on his mission, and when he returned, then he went down to BYU, and as a little matter of interest, he was voted most popular man the year he graduated from BYU. In fact, Flora was at that time serving a mission in Hawaii, and one of her friends wrote her and said, "You better write to him and let him remember you, because all the other girls are after him."
Tell us more about the experience he had as the eldest of 11 children when his father left on him. I guess they all 11 weren't born yet, but he was, 12 when his father left on his mission?
He was 12, nearly 13. His father was called to go to the Midwest. His mother was expecting her 8th child, so she was already in an interesting stage of life. They sold off some of the acreage to help pay for the mission, but there were still a number of acres to take care of. There was a large dairy herd. And
did he really manage that? I mean, that was really his job?
Apparently he did, and there was a hired hand that he and his wife moved in with the Bensons to help them while the father was gone. But the dairy herd And many of the garden, the crops, and some of the acreage where they raised hay in particular, and the sugar beets, can you imagine this 12, 13, 14-year-old boy was in charge of?
Often in later years in his life, in interviews and often in sermons, he would make reference to that particular experience, sending his father off on a mission. Obviously, that had a tremendous impact on his personality, on the way he looked at life. Did it not, Sherry?
I think so. Whenever he would talk about it, he spoke with great emotion. So I gather, and again, we're all kind of piecing this together, but I always assumed that, number one, it was hard to be separated from his father. Then his father would write these letters telling about these marvelous missionary experiences, and the young Ezra had a great missionary zeal. He was always really fascinated by that. And so I think that touched him and affected him. But also getting this feeling that he was in charge. His dad hadn't been gone very long when a smallpox epidemic kind of swept through Whitney. His mother became very ill. In fact, they were tempted to call home his father from the mission, and she said, no, I'm going to be fine. But it's hard for me to imagine the burden that a boy that young would, but he was just,
How did he
the older
perform?
brother.
What were the fortunes of the farm during that period?
Well, they kept it together. I don't know if they made any money, but they made enough to, they at least kept food on the table. They didn't lose the farm. And his father came back and they resumed their farming. So I assume he did pretty well.
All right, thank you very much, Sherry Dew. Let's return to Whitney with Ruth Todd and Steve Eager and see what the progress is as they're preparing for that graveside service. Ruth?
It looks like more of the general authorities have arrived. They have gone and taken their places under the white awnings you see behind our shoulders. Also, the family vans have arrived. Big vans full of people, children, parents. They're all coming and taking their place as well.
Something to note, Dwayne was talking earlier about burial sites and family members being buried around the church presidents who are buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. President Benson will be buried here right near us within about, 15 feet is President Benson's mother and father's gravesite, George T. and Sarah Benson, and some other family members. So that holds true in Whitney, Idaho as well.
It does. Here's his brother, Orville, who passed away. Orville's widow still lives at the Benson family home here in Whitney, just about a mile away.
Right, and that was decorated with the yellow ribbons. We visited there this morning, and they're all starting to arrive. We're just still waiting for the hearse, but the family members are taking their place as well. The members of the funeral party itself are now arriving. We're not sure of the timetable of the hearse itself.
Right, and it's been so interesting to just watch families. We've seen single people, we've seen couples, we've seen parents with their children, all coming in their Sunday clothes. We met someone in town today that said, I want my children to see this. You know, not a lot comes to Whitney, Idaho. I want my children to see this so they can have a memory of the prophet being buried here in our town.
And the feel here, too, is maybe different than some people might know. Oftentimes LDS funerals are maybe different than other funerals in that I heard it said that it's almost a graduation type feeling sometimes. Instead of a moment of sorrow, it's more of just some reverence and a lot of thought, but also as if they've moved on.
Stephen and Ruth, Dwayne here, as you look around you, just through the pictures that we're seeing, quite a few members of the media. We see a lot of photographers. Can you give us some idea of what kind of coverage this small town of Whitney, Idaho is receiving?
Dwayne, I can tell you, I talked to the sheriff this morning, and he predicted the town of Whitney, population approximately 425, would probably quadruple today, even possibly tenfold, depending on, they didn't know how many folks would be here. We've got television crews from Salt Lake City. We have a truck down here from Idaho and print media from just about everywhere. I recognize a lot of the Salt Lake media. I don't know some of these folks who are out here. I assume they may be Boise, Idaho Falls, and maybe even worldwide AP.
We've heard about folks coming from Boise, Vernal.
Groups of
well-wishers that will come to and join the media. So a lot of people here, Dwayne.
All right. We'll rejoin you, too, in just a moment as the hearse does arrive on that final trip for President Benson. He, of course, spent a lifetime traveling the world, both as a Secretary of Agriculture and as a religious leader. He must have traveled millions of miles, I guess. His pace slowed a bit as he aged. Still, in the first years of the Benson administration, he found plenty of opportunity to be out and about, and our Shelley Osterloh takes a look at that.
After all the years he spent in Washington, D.C., it seemed appropriate for President Ezra Taft Benson to return to the nation's capital for his first official trip outside Utah as the Mormon prophet. He paid courtesy calls on President Ronald Reagan and visited down the hall with Vice President George Bush. But he went to Washington on church business to help organize a new stake. 2 months later, he ventured out again to Ohio, once headquarters of the LDS Church. 150 years earlier in Kirtland, the Mormons had built their first temple. He came to commemorate that event.
With all my heart, I love this work.
In August 1986, he traveled to yet another church history site. This is the home where Joseph Smith lived as a young boy. Across the road, the place Mormons call the Sacred Grove, where Joseph Smith says he saw God and Jesus Christ.
I can hardly talk because I want to cry to think that we're here in the very spot.
During his administration, President Benson traveled to temple dedications and other church events, mostly domestic trips. A few times, though, he traveled abroad. In 1987, Mormons commemorated the 150th anniversary of the church's establishment in the British Isles. Amidst traditional British pomp and ceremony, President Benson and the church welcomed the accolades of the English.
Tonight, this is a joint, great American and British occasion. There is, to my mind, no one who cannot admire the Mormon people.
President Benson was a lifelong scouter. In 1988, he joined thousands of scouts at an encampment in Idaho. But his pace began to slow and travel became more difficult. In 1989, he returned to Washington, D.C. for the inauguration of George Bush as President of the United States. He ventured out a few more times until ill health and advanced age kept him at home. Shelley Osterloh, KSL News, Salt Lake City.
Well, during a number of those trips, I suppose you were along, covering the religion beat for us. Tell me what your recollections are of President Benson traveling.
You know, the thing that comes to mind, first of all, Bruce, is in the hotels. We had the opportunity of staying in the same hotels on occasion, and I would go outside my door and see President Benson on the arm of his personal secretary, Gary Gillespie. They would be walking up and down the hall, exercising. This would be after a long day of meetings. He just felt that he needed to get out, stretch his legs, and the exercise he got would be going up and down the hallway.
How did he handle the press of the crowds in that sort of an environment? Because he received constant attention in most of those settings.
In the initial years of his administration, he loved to mingle with the crowds. He would, as we've seen in some of the video today, children would come up to him. He would put his arms around them, embrace them, hug them. This was something that was quite frequently seen throughout his administration. He would like to shake hands. He enjoyed mingling with the saints around the world.
I can see that Sherry must have an anecdote about President Benson traveling.
I concur with that. It's not necessarily traveling as much as mingling with the saints. It would have been January of 1988. He made an unexpected visit in my home ward in Sandy, Utah. And to see him come into that setting and to see how the children responded, but he immediately went to the young men and the young women, hope you're going to go on a mission, and would shaking their hands, and just, he seemed to be energized by meeting with the saints.
That's something I observed too, Bruce and Sherry, is he would brighten up. He would become literally energized as he would come upon a group of people, as he had opportunity to visit with them. It was an energizing sort of an experience for President Benson, even at that advanced age.
I was amazed reading your biography how much early travel he did for a boy who had spent his entire life in Cache Valley for 20 years, and then when he finished his tour of duty as a missionary in England, he boarded an airplane in 1923 and flew London to Paris and then toured the continent. I thought that was fairly progressive for 1923.
He has had amazing curiosity, and the interesting thing is, maybe the ironic thing, is that when he left on his mission, he had never been further away from home than Logan. You know, 25 miles or something.
Never been to Salt Lake?
Never been to Salt Lake City until he came here to go through the temple. And so he goes to England, and from there, literally, I can't think of a place he hasn't been, and been many, many times, not only through his church service, but of course through his many agricultural appointments. He literally has traveled the world, and I think has been just thrilled to see the peoples of the world. He has a tremendous amount of love for all people, and certainly my experience with him was during his term as prophet, and I think part of that is the prophetic mantle, but there was a deep wellspring within him of just concern and love for all people.
One of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier in the telecast earlier in the day was the fact that he didn't just mingle, though, with Mormons as he traveled around the world. He was one who encountered the leaders of the world. He was accepted by them. He virtually had diplomatic credentials, did he not, Sherry?
Oh, it's hard to imagine now, but when you start going down the list of men that he sat toe-to-toe with and had lunch with and talked with, you know, the Tito and Eisenhower and Chiang Kai-shek and David Ben-Gurion, and the list goes on and on and on. And they seem to have a marvelous respect. One of the anecdotes that really has always given me a chuckle, we've heard so much about, as he's talked about, the Book of Mormon. Well, as he traveled as Secretary of Agriculture, and he would go to all these places and visit heads of state and diplomats and ambassadors, he'd always take with him a gift of the Book of Mormon, and his files from his secretary days are filled with letters that say something like this. Secretary Benson, thank you for visiting us in our country. We appreciate your stay. We'd like to thank you for the copy of the Book of Mormon you brought us. It is the 4th copy you've brought us on your visit. And, you know, but they seem to just have a respect for what he stood for.
All right, thank you. We'll come back again. Sherry, do we understand right now that something is taking place in the cemetery? I think perhaps the hearse has arrived. Ruth?
Thanks, Bruce. We just heard that the limo carrying the immediate family is coming up the lane. The lane is about 200, 300 yards.
Hearse is leading the way as well. And we suspect, Bruce, just for information, we are told the hearse arrived at the church about 20 minutes ago, and I suspect there were so many people in the public taking that shuttle bus over, they probably waited a while to give them a chance, the public that is, to shuttle over here. Those shuttle buses have slowed now, and as the hearse makes its way up here.
But
we
before
see the
they
hearse
slowed
now from our camera. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, you can. No, but before those shuttle buses slowed down, really, one after the other, they were big family vans, just unloaded with groups and groups of people. Also, for these people, in case anybody was wondering, the church audio-visual department has set up a PA system. So probably on 2 or 3 different occasions, some of the officials have asked the crowds to please move back. They've said, we need 50 feet, we need 75 feet. And not to worry, because everyone will be able to hear. They are piping this throughout the entire cemetery. So people sitting under the shade of some of the big cottonwood trees will be able to hear just as well as the people right up front.
I assume this is the phenomenon of a cottonwood tree rather than a snowstorm in June, because we see these what look like great big flakes coming down all around you. It's that season.
Yeah. Cottonwoods are weeping, yes.
Exactly, and frankly, it's so warm out here, the breeze is blowing them off the tree. It's kind of nice, Bruce.
The hearse, Bruce, is headed north now. It'll make another turn to the west and then pull up to the awning area that we've already shown you, and that's where the pallbearers would come up. They're going to make a turn here in about 25 feet, and there's the limos behind them carrying the close family.
Steve, are the pallbearers in place, or are they following the hearse?
Yes, they look like they're in place to me. They're standing along the roadway. Yes, they are. I don't know if the pool can get a shot, or has a shot of that, but they're standing there ready to greet the hearse as it pulls up.
Okay, we see cars, limos immediately following the hearse. Would that be the children of President Benson?
Correct. The immediate family, the children of President Benson, 2 limos full.
Yes, I see Mark Benson, and I see some daughters as well.
We learned not long ago that Reed Benson, of course, will be dedicating the grave, performing that ordinance for the church. His wife, May, lost her father just 2 weeks ago, Rulon Hinckley, and he was buried. President Gordon B. Hinckley spoke at that funeral. And so this particular arm of the Benson family has had a particularly difficult month, losing 2 of that particular generation.
Here you see they've opened the doors to the hearse now and are withdrawing the casket on either side. I think you'll soon see the assembly of these grandsons of Ezra Taft Benson, who will assist in carrying the casket to the graveside. It appears that the crowd... Go ahead, Ruth.
I was just going to say, Bruce, as is normal when there's any kind of large gathering, as the hearse pulled up, the crowds, they were kind of loosely gathered, and they all have just converged closer. The crowd has tightened considerably closer toward the center of all the activity.
Ruth, we see them taking out a flag now and draping it over the casket, and I suppose that is about as fitting and symbolic given the feelings of patriotism that Ezra Taft Benson had and voiced throughout his long career, as one might expect. He spent a short time in what I think was the forerunner of the ROTC at the Agricultural College in the final days of World War I, didn't actually serve in the war, but had very strong feelings of patriotism for his country, and we see that American flag being draped over the casket.
If there was a theme to his life, it's been suggested that it would be family, God, and country. He spoke along those themes. His sons have addressed those particular themes, suggesting that indeed was part of his life, and as you say, Bruce, entirely appropriate that an American flag would drape the coffin of this well-known patriot.
As a matter of fact, Sherry, earlier this morning, you suggested that much of the other messages that President Benson taught were really derived from his strong sense of individual freedom.
I think that's true, and the other thing that comes to mind is he felt that this country was so precious because it provided a place where the gospel could flourish. He'd always call America the Lord's base of operations, a place of stability and again, political stability, so that there would be the means and the economy and everything to support a growing church that had to be the headquarters to take it throughout the world.
For him, probably for more so than any other Mormon prophet, except perhaps its founder, Joseph Smith, he saw little, if any, distinction between things that were spiritual or things that were secular or things that were political.
He felt that they all was to converge to support the onward movement of the church and the gospel kingdom as it rolled forward in these days.
Bruce and Sherry, I found it interesting this morning that during the funeral service, President Gordon B. Hinckley drew the parallel of the death of Erich Honecker, the former strongman in the East Germany, German Democratic Republic. Obviously, that's an interesting parallel, that on the same day, the very same day in two parts of the world, this patriot, if you will, and that communist dictator would have passed away.
You see now the pallbearers are positioning the casket over the gravesite. They'll lower it, and within just a matter of moments, I'm sure, this graveside service will begin under the direction of President Hinckley will conduct. Seems to be a hush on the crowd, very much at attention. And here we now can hear President Hinckley. We'll let you listen to this uninterrupted.
Hinckley, after you're completed with the dedication of the grave, the last thing we usually do is fold the flag and visit the family.
Yes. It would appear that members of the 12 are there on the front row surrounding the casket. President Hinckley there at the microphone just at the head of the casket. Family members and others crowding about. Looks like a tremendous crowd, Steve and Ruth.
I think the crowd has swelled. We talked about 200 to 300. We may be 400, maybe even pushing 500. They have really pushed in as well, as Ruth mentioned before. Everybody has moved in as the brethren. Oh, there's President Hinckley starting us.
This is the return of the native. President Benson, after his marvelous career and the influence which he has given across the world, has returned to his native Cache Valley for burial. This cotton flying through the air this June day would be familiar to him. Here he grew and matured, and it was from here that he went to fulfill his many missions in various parts of the earth. We're grateful to have you here. It's a warm day. The sun is hot, we know that. These services will be brief. We're grateful for all who've assembled. It was an interesting thing in driving up here to see the people along the highway, some of them with signs. We love you, President Benson. We thank you, O God, for a prophet. Things of that kind. A great outpouring of appreciation and love and respect. We have with us today Larry Echo Hawk, Attorney General of the state of Idaho, his wife Terry, and Idaho State Auditor J.D. Williams, and his wife Mary Ann, who represent the state of Idaho at this service and at the prior service. Idaho Governor Cecil Andrus is out of the country. In addition, Lieutenant Governor C.W. Butch Otter and Secretary of State Pete Sanarusa will represent the state at the burial in Whitney, and we assume they are here. We received this note from Elizabeth Zinser, president of the University of Idaho, who came with others recently to bestow on President Benson special honors from the Alumni Association of the University of Idaho. Mrs. Zinser, who is not a member of the church, writes, "What a glorious life President Ezra Taft Benson lived for the church and for humanity. We are proud and grateful for his contribution to education and the University of Idaho and throughout the world. His teachings will inspire millions in this and future generations." I just want to read a line or two from a statement that he made in Logan some years ago concerning this valley in which he was born and grew. Said he, "It's good to be back in Cache Valley. This valley's home to me. It will always be home. I was born here, I grew up here." And we might add, and here he will be buried today. He speaks with love and affection concerning this part of the world. And what a beautiful thing that he can come here for his final resting place. These beautiful words of Robert Louis Stevenson were quoted in part by President Thompson this morning. I'd like to give this full requiem. It's very brief. I think it's beautiful and so very appropriate. Under the wide and starry sky, dig the grave and let me lie. Glad did I live and gladly die, and I lay me down with a will. This be the verse you grave for me. Here he lies where he longed to be. Home is the sailor, home from the sea, and the hunter home from the hill. Elder Reed Benson, President Benson's oldest son and oldest child, will give the dedicatory prayer, following which the flag will be removed and folded, and you'll be free to visit for a short time. It's suggested, though, that you not linger too long, that you let the cemetery people complete their work here. I just want to call attention to these magnificent flowers, which have come from many parts of the world to pay tribute to this beloved man. The magnificent white roses, which were on the top of his casket, speak of the purity and goodness and virtue of his life. God bless his memory to our good. We gained so much from him, as did so many others, and we feel so deeply grateful for his beneficent influence over so long a period of time. In the name of the Savior whom he loved, even the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. Brother Reed.
Let us unite in prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. By virtue of the holy priesthood in me vested, I dedicate and consecrate this burial place. This burial plot is the resting place of thy son and servant, Ezra Taft Benson. We thank thee, O Holy Father, for the plan of salvation, for our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, for his atoning sacrifice that broke the bands of death. We thank thee for his empty tomb and glorious resurrection which assures us that every tomb shall in due time be empty. We thank thee for the noble life of Ezra Taft Benson. We are grateful that he discharged so well mankind's three great loyalties. Loyalty to God as a great prophet, loyalty to family as a great patriarch, and loyalty to country as a great patriot. We are grateful for the sacred sod from which he sprung, even Cache Valley, for his spiritual heritage and those nurturing hands that blessed him. We are grateful for all those who held up his arms in righteousness all through the years. To that end, we are particularly mindful of his faithful kin and of his faithful counselors, even Presidents Hinckley and Monson. May we be among the number who will faithfully sustain the successors of President Benson. Now, Holy Father, wilt thou bless and protect and hallow this cemetery where lies some of the humble followers of Christ, the salt of the earth. May those who come to honor this plowboy who became a prophet leave from here with an increased devotion to the cause of Christ, for which Ezra Taft Benson gave his life. And may we also live that one day we might return to thee, Holy Father, to live with our loved ones in thy heavenly home. We pray in the name of him who made it all possible through his atoning sacrifice, even our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Benson, very much. All right.
And that would conclude the formal graveside service for Ezra Taft Benson.
May I, on behalf of the family, express appreciation to all who have made of this a significant and wonderful and beautiful day. All who participated in the funeral services in the tabernacle, and all who have come up here to pay homage to our beloved leader. We urge you to drive safely on your return home. This marks the end of this service. God bless you till we meet again. Thank you.
We
Thank you very, very much.
Spontaneous singing of the Mormon hymn, "We Thank Thee, O God, for a Prophet," Ezra Taft Benson, having served nearly 9 years as the 13th prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Steve Eager, Ruth Todd are at the cemetery in Whitney. We were unable to see who received the flag that had been draped over the casket. I don't know from where you were, if you were able to answer that question for us.
I was not. I asked Ruth the same question. She could see. We could not see that.
Traditionally, Bruce, the flag would be given to the surviving family members, oftentimes the eldest surviving child if there is no spouse. I would presume that would have been given to Reed Benson.
Bruce, I don't know if you could hear from where you were, if you could tell, when the crowd spontaneously broke out into the Mormon hymn, "We Thank Thee, O God, for a Prophet," it began with just a few voices, but by the time the chorus hit, it had swelled to a large one.
All right, thank you very much, Ruth Todd and Steve Eager, for your coverage from Whitney. That party will now be leaving. The family's going to the Mormon Ward House there for a meal, and the other members of the party from Salt Lake will be returning home. Dwayne, tell us what else takes place now in terms of the leadership of the Mormon Church. They sang of a prophet, and there's certainly something to take place shortly in that regard.
Certainly, the reorganization of the First Presidency will be taking place, we believe, very shortly. We have some indication that a meeting could take place in the Salt Lake Temple as early as tomorrow, with the announcement of the reorganization to come sometime in the next few days. The procedure is one that's well established. The 14 apostles that remain would gather in the temple, and the expressions would be made by the apostles in order of seniority about reconstituting the First Presidency, at the conclusion of which the senior apostle, outside of the most senior, the one who would become president of the church, would then lay his hands upon the head of the senior apostle, that being, in this case, Howard W. Hunter, and he would be ordained and set apart as the 14th president of the church sometime in the next few days.
Okay, I'm sure there'll be a great deal of anticipation. Thank you, Dwayne Cardall, our religion specialist. That concludes our special report. Ezra Taft Benson, a final tribute. We thank you for joining us. We thank especially Sherry Dew for sharing her perspectives on President Benson's life as his biographer. And thanks to many members of our team behind the scenes who have worked to bring this coverage to you. Be sure to join the news specialist this evening at 6 for a complete review of today's historic events, tonight at 6 and at 10 o'clock. With Dwayne Cardall, I'm Bruce Lindsay, wishing you a good afternoon.